Hey everybody. I'm getting on here because I watched Rustin, the Netflix film, and any of y'all have been watching me know I'm a big history person. I studied history, I got my degrees in history, and I'm somebody who does not like historical movies because they're always wrong or deeply, deeply ahistorical. But I watched them anyway. I have this thing with hate watching certain things because I feel the need to correct them because African American history is just very close to my heart, and it's necessary that we preserve it, but preserve it correctly. And Rustin did not disappoint in terms of my historical experiences with historical movies, which is that they are terrible. So here we go. All right. So the movie, based on Bayard Rustin, who was a huge union organizer, a civil rights activist from the 40s, went through the 50s, 60s, 70s, gay rights activist, openly gay man. And I think that was, why they decided to kind of highlight his story, right? Fine. Yes, okay? That's all part of who he was and is. I mean, even in his legacy. All right. So they start the movie like they often do, okay, with the 1954 Brown versus Board decision to integrate schools, okay, saying that that is illegal. All right. Then they show like famous incidents that all of us are familiar with, even if you don't really know the details, you're at least used to the imagery, right? So the incidents of black people sitting down, right, having to sit in protest and being harassed, demeaned, brutalized by white people as they acted nonviolently, all to just be able to eat in peace, right? Then we get the Ruby Bridges. Ruby Bridges, who is only 69 years old right now. Right. Okay. Um, she's 69 in 2023. Going to school, skipping along, um, despite the fact that she was moving into a New Orleans school and she, this one black girl, is integrating this New Orleans school. Okay. Now they just kind of show her skipping along, and that's the image, right? But what pisses me off is now that we have, first of all, people knew this then, and people have short memories. But when black people do these kind of movies or work with white people on these movies, they don't correct stuff to put it in to make it look like what it is. They sit with the safe, what they think is safe images. Okay, you forgot to show that part where there were grown ass white people surrounding that school, throwing stuff at her, yelling at her, cursing at her, swearing at her. You forgot to show that part. Okay? So John F. Kennedy, who stood for very little, and I'll go in on him some other time, was asked by civil rights leaders before that happened to walk her into school that day to signify to the nation that he meant what he said regarding civil rights when it became a PR problem across the world internationally. When Africa is decolonizing and they're looking over to America and looking to the Soviet Union for allies, and quite frankly, don't want to ally themselves with the United States, who they can actively see in live footage of international media and the way they treat African Americans. It's obvious y'all aren't on the side of liberation. Okay, so that's why he did that. They said, we'll just walk her into school. He didn't do it. Okay, bastard. Anyway, so the only fun part of that story that they didn't show, of course, because when we tell our history, the real stuff isn't good. It's got to be, comfortable for white people, and self-hating black people. Anyway, the only fun part of the Ruby Bridges story to me is, when she's asked about it, years later, how it felt to have people screaming, these racial epithets, and throwing things at her. And she said, well, I was from New Orleans. She was 6 years old, entering first grade, and, none of the kids was there. She basically had a one-on-one tutor with her white teacher and stuff, because they wouldn't even send their kids to school. Isn't that some internship? But anyway, and she said she didn't really understand, what was happening, and she said, but the one thing I did think, because they were yelling and screaming so much because I'd grown up in New Orleans, she said, I just thought because I, was kind of centered and walking down a certain part of the street, that it was a parade. Like it was like Mardi Gras. So she just kind of saw herself in the middle of Mardi Gras. And for some reason, every time, that just blesses my soul that God can do that. He can do that. Here your haters are throwing stuff at you, trying to harm you and hurt you, and you having a party in your head. You all right with me, Ruby? All right. So famous scene of Elizabeth Eckford It's just the beginning of the movie. I know y'all like, dang, you was going in on just these three scenes like that. Yup. Okay. A famous scene of Elizabeth Eckford of the Little Rock Nine, who helped integrate Central High School with well over 1,000 white students and 9 black people seem to cause all this trouble. I was a little bothered by one, them showing the students and then showing the chili being thrown over Minnie's head before they showed Elizabeth Eckford. No, what happened was Minnie, who was one of the Little Rock Nine, actually, when this white boy kept harassing her in the cafeteria, she took her bowl of chili and slammed it on his head, and everybody got completely quiet because they were not expecting a black person to resist. Okay, they knew they could harass black people with this nonviolent resistance, which takes a lot of strength. And the cafeteria workers, all of whom were black, broke out into applause. But instead, we had the white boy throwing chili on her head. Why couldn't y'all just show the real story? Because then you have to deal with the fact that black people have not been passive actors in history. That whether or not we are living in a system that completely oppresses us, brutalizes us, whether people try to convince themselves or not, it's real. And to resist that is bold. But black people were just taking it all the time. Yes, we're up against a system that's against us in numbers and anti-blackness and everything else. And then y'all had these 45-year-olds trying to play these 17-year-olds. Miss me. Okay? And that didn't make no sense. All right. So finally we get to the scene with Bayard Rustin. Okay? We get the first scene with Bayard Rustin making a plea to Dr. Martin Luther King to help lead this march of 5,000 people in Los Angeles. Dr. King was like, look, I'm not your man. Now, this element of who Martin Luther King Jr. is very similar to who he was in real life. He did not go seeking trouble or lights or fame. Okay, it was very clear, not only from his own writings, but from things Coretta Scott King said just about him, that he just wanted a simple life after getting his PhD. He wanted to pastor a church and read his books and have like a study and maybe at some point teach. That was it. That was what he wanted to do. And like he said, history had seized him. So he wasn't like always trying to go out there. Like there were people who really were like, no, we need to tie ourselves to the tracks like Gandhi did. And he's like, wait, whoa. Y'all, look, I led this and y'all asked me to lead this Montgomery bus boycott because nobody knew me in the city. They didn't know enough about me to even like know where I lived. They eventually found out because they bombed his home and stuff. But nevertheless, and so, Bayard Rustin's making this plea, like, you're telling me you're not the man, but like, you also told, E.D. Nixon, who was the head of NAACP in Alabama, you weren't the man either. But you did it. Like, so, God knows Martin Luther King wasn't looking for it because he died poor. He died poor despite all the stars who admired him, this, that, and the other. Have y'all ever looked at the pictures of his funeral? So for people who think they know about Martin Luther King, oh, he was so weak and this and that, you don't know shit about Martin Luther King. You ain't read nothing. You've been watching these movies like this only. So he was carried in. If you go back and look at the pictures of his funeral, or even like the footage, he was carried in this rickety carriage pulled by 2 donkeys. His casket. That's how little they had. And what he did, despite his lack of resources, when he won that Nobel Peace Prize, every single penny of it went back to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to support the movement. Now, I wasn't there, but I know if I was Coretta, I would be really stressed out. We got all these people trying to bomb us, kill us when you ain't here, when you are here. Me and you both fighting for these rights because she's the one who introduced him to these anti-war ideas and stuff like that. I bet you didn't know that. But if you did, good for you. And if you don't, read up on her. And you're not going to keep nothing for us? Now, I wasn't there. I don't know if she said that, but I'm just saying I would have been thinking that. Anyway, but I'm saying that because it couldn't have been anybody but God and the Holy Spirit leading you to do that. And it still had that kind of success. Like, how? You had 4 kids, a wife. I mean, we're just talking about basic things. Like, so the people that judge Martin Luther King is based on what you don't know. And if you're still stuck in that Malcolm X or Martin Luther King thing, I know you haven't read much. Anyway, let me say this. I was actually really excited, believe it or not, to get a film based on Bayard Rustin. He is an unsung hero to many because people don't read. But his hands are often everywhere in the struggle, particularly, um, in the '60s. But I mean, he didn't start being an activist in the '60s. He had always been doing that. But you know, so I thought that was good that he was being highlighted. Even now, people try to sensationalize the fact that he's gay or was gay. And all this hoopla that comes about in the 1980s with the neoconservative movement and Reagan politics was just that hoopla. Okay? Gay people were not an invention of the 1980s. Okay? And people like Martin Luther King Jr., even Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, Ella Baker, another one who needs more recognition, did not spend their days worried about who gay people were sleeping with. People weaponized that when people got on their nerves, as we saw with the Adam Clayton Powell bit, which, well, I'll get to in a second. But, like, they knew that. Malcolm X being like this with James Baldwin, another one who's openly gay, but people are admiring his writings and everything else. Right. So these become ways that people weaponize. It's not that gay people were not mistreated. I'm not saying that. It's not that gay people weren't isolated. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that these people that people have truncated in history and tried to make it seem like, oh, they were like this, or, things were hard for Bayard Rustin as a gay man, and the bravery it took to embrace that as a gay black man took a lot. Yes. But sensationalizing it in a way, instead of using it as a form of real liberation for, like, gay people, gay kids who grow up and watch somebody who pushed despite the odds, I think does it a serious injustice, okay? A serious one. All right. So, anyway, however, like I said, these movies are usually deeply ahistorical. However, Coleman Domingo is one of the few actors that I think are around today, like doing work, that when they play a part, they become the part and you forget he's acting. So I was excited that he's in it, and I know he's a gay man. And I was glad that it was somebody like him, who is, a gay black man playing a gay black part, which is not always easy, or the opportunities aren't there. And I was happy to see it because I enjoy good acting as a craft, which is why I think I'm so disappointed in, what's his name? Jonathan Majors. All right, because while I didn't find him attractive at all, I thought it was I just found him to be a great actor, and I don't know what's happening with him anymore. Anyway, but the thing is, this was a poorly done script. It was a poorly done movie. But I do think the character portrayal of, the voice of Bayard Rustin, I can tell he studied it. All right? But let me say this, because what really gets on my nerves more than anything else are the poor depictions of Martin Luther King Jr. in these movies that have been getting progressively, and aggressively worse, okay? His contributions to history are poorly done, that have been reduced, albeit being a big deal, to the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott and the last 60 seconds of the I Have a Dream speech, okay? Martin Luther King was very much a radical. And once again, some of y'all have allowed these larger white media outlets to brainwash you into thinking he was weak. Let me tell you something. Your country doesn't murder you because you're weak, a sellout that they can use. It doesn't happen like that. You don't get your face blown off on a balcony in Memphis, okay? In 1968, as you are fighting for sanitation workers and poor people's rights and poor black people's rights so they can take care of themselves in the richest nation in the world, and challenging the Vietnam War because you're weak. Okay, so catch. All right. Martin Luther King, especially at the time of his death, was outwardly calling for a radical redistribution of the wealth of the country. He came out against the Vietnam War, claiming that he would not support the United States' efforts to oppress and mistreat other dark people in another part of the world, the same way they were mistreating African Americans in the United States, because as far as he was concerned, this was the same behavior he was fighting. And it was the same kind of thing that they had gotten away with in America that made them think they could be arrogant enough to go over there, and that's why they lost Vietnam. Long before protesting, the Vietnam War had even gained traction, because many people were scared to say anything about this war. Martin Luther King was left alone, okay? Him and Coretta was marching in different places like Chicago. Let me tell you something. People were not happy, black and white alike, okay? And he lost allies left and right. Even most black ministers, most black Christians did not support him at the time of his death. They felt like he was getting out of his lane, just focused on civil rights. Martin Luther King was much too broad and understanding for that. He knew that civil rights at home, and this is when he starts talking about injustice anywhere as a threat to justice everywhere. If if they're going to give me my rights at home, which they haven't done, which he pointed out that he was tired. See, y'all don't know about these speeches, but he clearly said, I'm tired of marching for things that should have been mine at birth. Shout out to the 14th Amendment. Okay, because if America was clear on his promise, it wouldn't have needed the 15th Amendment. Because everything a citizen is supposed to have includes voting with the 14th Amendment. You had to put an amendment in the Constitution to make sure black men had the right to vote. Anyway, all right, so peep game. Peep game. All right, anyway, so I hate when they have these fuckboy actors play Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, these people have not and this is what, see, and somebody tried to get in my comments. You know, they said they didn't like some things that I said about Nigerians, this, that, and the other. And I understand that people have different cultural differences. And Nigerians have typically been very vocal about that, the ones who come to America. You know, I've heard people say over and over again, you know, I'm Nigerian, I'm not African American, I'm Jamaican, I'm not African American. And I totally get that. I totally understand embracing one's culture. But racially, you are considered black. And that is something different, though, because you do have a different culture, and I don't think people should suppress that. However, in my experiences, people, like a lot of these black British actors, typically who are descended from Nigeria, may have grown up in Great Britain or something like that, but just with black, British, black, Nigerian people that come over here, there is this condescension toward African Americans. The accusation that we have no culture, that we have no history. And first of all, our culture is not only copied by white people and reproduced every chance people get, but it has been manufactured all over the world. We are only 13% of the US population, and our culture has been manufactured and produced all over the world for centuries. From the time of the Fisk Jubilee singers traveling around the world to get money to support their HBCUs, the blues, the jazz music that was being played in German war camps. They just didn't know black people playing jazz and they were enjoying it. Yeah, catch. And it was the white music producers making money off of it. And so when people like Lorenz Tate are saying that, you know, there's a lot of black British actors, Britain has a film industry. And I don't want to knock anybody getting jobs, but I am saying, when I was saying Coleman Domingo playing this part and being from Philadelphia, being a black American and a black gay American and a black gay African American man is important. Yes. I think the woman who played Harriet Tubman in that film was great. But it's a black American story, and we all know we cannot trust white America and Hollywood to tell our stories without purposely having this bent to keep us quiet. And because so many of them do make the distinction, because many of them I do think feel superior to African Americans, they don't always push back the way black Americans would on certain aspects of their history and their stories. And so they'd rather have them in these positions. Just saying. Not saying that some of these people that get these parts aren't good. I was not impressed with the guy that played Fred Hampton in Jesus and Judas and the Black Messiah. And the movie was about the man who betrayed him. It wasn't really about Fred Hampton. And then we get this guy, Emil Amin, who, as far as I'm concerned, you can tell he has not studied Martin Luther King. And instead, people like him as an actor have studied people who have played Martin Luther King and played and studied the caricature of Martin Luther King, the prophet himself, but a caricature of him. And so it ends up being depicted as this kind of meek and weak man. The number of times I saw Martin Luther King put his head and eyes down in this movie pissed me off. So, and it's being destroyed by these bitch-ass actors who don't understand the story, and quite frankly, Hollywood producers who don't want the story to be told in that way. Now, granted, we could find African Americans that have ruined the part, but the point is that there are cultural dynamics, yes, between African Americans and other people from the Caribbean, from, you know, Western Africa in particular, who do come over here, who don't identify with the struggle and will still try to make money off of it or try to insert themselves in certain kind of movements. But at the same time, It's because they see it as a money-making exposure opportunity and have no commitment to the real struggle. And that is disappointing to me, especially since African Americans divesting and forcing people to divest from Shell, Coca-Cola, especially when it was apartheid in South Africa and other places, have been so active with sort of their international view, as well as things at home. Not saying that we always said kind things and stuff like that. Okay, I'm not acting like we didn't grow up in school and hear somebody call people an African booty scratcher. You know, I'm not acting like that. But I am saying that these things need to be talked about. And people won't always agree with me. But the bottom line is this is what I've witnessed over and over and over again. And quite frankly, I think there's a lot of people, whether they want to admit it out loud or not, know that these conversations are always happening, distinguishing themselves from African Americans at school. I've watched it. You know, not hanging out with the other black kids on purpose because you're not like them. Not realizing the police, they don't ask if you're from Nigeria, Jamaica, Haiti before they shoot. And that's the depth of anti-blackness. Yes, embrace your culture. I think African Americans are happy to learn about these other cultures. But the idea that you're superior to us somehow it's infuriating to me. So I say that to say that when you do that, you take away, it's important to me that Black Americans have control over their stories. And Black Americans who know what they're doing. And I'll get to that in a second. All right, so there are plenty of people who have played Martin Luther King, okay? But not everybody has played him well. But like the rest of the country, okay, being in Hollywood, politics, or the field of education, we know that the mediocre, the stupid, okay, tend to get put out in front of us and promoted as a star, okay? And the more intelligent people, the better actors seem to almost get pushed back. And you're like, where did that person go? You know what I mean? Like, the people who are good, you're like wondering why. And it's probably because they're dedicated to the art and passing up on a lot of these bad movies. Anyway, but we know that the mediocre can be promoted to be a movie star or, I don't know, the Speaker of the House, you know, a principal. So we see this in America all the time, this praising of the mediocre. Because people, I think, prefer somebody who lacks talent, because we've made a whole culture around mediocrity, hidden behind protecting people's mental health. And mental health is an issue. It's more of an environmental factor in the exploitation of pharmaceutical companies that have led to our mental health decline in this country, and the purporting of capitalism that has led to it. And the fact that things are more inaccessible, more expensive, so on and so forth, and it's causing stress and depression and things like that. But this culture of mediocrity has allowed certain people to stay in power and not have to work hard to stay in power. And then those who have less education, less opportunities have just gotten less and less. And not because they don't work hard. Because let me tell you something, millennials, we work hard. These Gen Zers, they don't work hard. But you know what? Neither did baby boomers were also coming in at a time when you could buy houses for $17 and shit. And now looking at us saying it's just because we don't want to work. Miss me. Whoopi Goldberg. Anyway, so because I'm sure people are like, well, you just going up. You're right, I am. But there are actors who have played Martin Luther King Jr. well. Okay, here we go. Paul Winfield, one of the first ones. You don't know him, you need to look him up. You probably know his face though. First to star as a civil rights leader. Martin Luther King, the civil rights leader, in NBC's 1978 television miniseries King, which was good. Although, never mind, I'm not gonna start with that. I'll get to that in a second. Jeffrey Wright in the 2001 TV movie Boycott, that was great. David Oyelowo. So once again, this is an example. 2014 in Selma actually played Martin Luther King very well. Okay, in Ava DuVernay's, Selma. He played it well. I wasn't mad at that. I also wasn't mad at the speech that he gave on Martin Luther King Day in Atlanta when he was talking about his experience as a Nigerian and connecting it to the history of African descended people after slavery. It was clear he knew what he was talking about and had taken time to study a culture. And that to me impressed me. On top of the fact that he played that part well. It was more than a part to him. And I respect that. Bad actors, people like Anthony Mackie and shit like that. Emil Amin, miss me, the guy who played it in this movie. Anyway, so we start to see the relationship between Martin Luther King and Bayard Rustin develop, which had been there for years, by the way. Okay, like back to the mid-50s, okay? So needless to say, well, no, not needless to say, let me get introduced to the king of cats, honey. Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Jr., who I wrote my senior thesis on at Spelman. That's a whole nother story for another day. But needless to say, I appreciate his legacy. And Clayton Powell Jr. was the pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, one of the oldest African American churches in the United States, and one of the first black churches ever built in America, and stayed. I mean, it's still here, live and well. People, it's an active church, and as I live and breathe in Harlem. So, and for the record, Adam Clayton Powell did have many shortcomings. Okay, I will say his story was not so much distorted; it was undeveloped, but nevertheless. He had plenty of shortcomings, real ones, okay? But while being a full-time pastor of Abyssinian, he was also the first black congressman from New York and became that while he fought to create a Harlem congressional district. Harlem didn't have a congressional district to have a congressional representative. It was included with Manhattan, the larger, like the Upper East Side, this and the other. And it was kind of gerrymandered in a way where you would be associated with other parts of the city, so the black vote wouldn't be concentrated, even though black people were concentrated in terms of where they could live. This is important. He was also the chair of the Education and Labor Committee in Congress, which was a huge committee. I'm going to tell you why it's important. And he supported radical people publicly, okay? Okay, publicly, let me be clear. Like Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party, even after Malcolm X's death. The Black Panther Party, you all probably know this, did the free breakfast program, right? Because they were black socialists and they were creating a free shoe program, free sickle cell research programs, all these things they did to prove that these socialist programs could work. Nevertheless, the free breakfast program that became a federal program that people still have access to today, despite budget cuts to everything, except war, of course. Why did it become a federal program? I'm going to tell you. Because he chaired that committee in Congress and pushed those bills through and made them laws. He worked with black radicals, okay? So while working with the Black Panther Party, had he not been chair of that Education and Labor Committee, we're talking about a federal program that's followed people till this day. And a lot of people don't know about him. So the fact that he was in politics working with black radicals at the time, people could just straight up be card-carrying members of the KKK in Congress with absolutely no shame. They don't really have much shame now either. But nevertheless, the irony of that is that the Obamas executive producing this film, and we know that can be about a man who went against the odds, like Bayard Rustin, and even with Adam Clayton Powell being significant in this movie, and Adam Clayton Powell, who could have passed for white. You can look him up. You'd probably be shocked, like, wait, what? Who could have passed for white and always let you know how black he was, okay? And both his parents were black, very light, very fair. And he took hits. But, he stood on something. And so when people like Obama are like executive producing now, which I also kind of feel like it's like, anyway, was running and tuck-tailing to Republicans who weren't going to respect his black ass no way, okay, no matter what. It's just giving irony for me. It's giving, you should have taken a page out of this man's book before you got into office, because now making these trashy, cheap, truncated stories about black leaders who you clearly understand as much as being produced in this film, which is not a compliment, you could have learned more and you could have done more. And don't say, oh, well, he was the very black person, he couldn't do that. I can't stand that stuff. Everybody kept saying, well, he can't do this. And when white people said it, I really got infuriated. When the whole idea is racist and internally racist for black people who said it. Black people can't do something if white people are going to get mad and come at you. They've been doing that since the first African arrived against their will on the shores of America, okay? So miss me with that in the comments. Miss me with that completely. This is my criticism, so on and so forth. And I know executive producing can be vanity to some degree, but the point is, I had a teacher who always taught me in middle school, never do anything that you're not willing to put your name on. I don't want my name on everything. And that's all I'm going to say. So now back to the film. We get Adam Clayton Powell, who actually did have a real life beef, especially with Martin Luther King. Okay? And yes, it was motivated in large part by nothing but absolute jealousy. Okay? I'm just going to give it to you straight. All right? They did. And preachers sometimes, believe it or not, don't get along and fight, even when they have the same calling. All right? So now you get Adam Clayton Powell did react the way he did react when he found out Martin Luther King and Bayard Rustin were planning to boycott both the Democratic and Republican parties. neither of whom had done anything significant to protect African Americans. Hell, most black people in the South were unable to vote because of the Democratic Party. Those Dixiecrats, they were all part of the Democratic Party. So, and Southerners who had poll tests, lynched people, and bombed people's houses for even trying to exercise their right to vote. Democratic Party at that time. So, yeah, they had every reason. And Martin Luther King was like, I'm not going to endorse these candidates. But it wasn't simply because Bayard Rustin had said it. We're talking about somebody who actually had disagreed with this perpetually and was fighting to enfranchise black people and saying that they needed to prove to us, after I supported this country. Martin Luther King is the same one who said one of the greatest, I can't remember the word I want to say mysteries, but that's not the word he used, of the 20th century is the level of loyalty Negroes have shown to America. And I was just like, and the way he said it was basically, because white people were asking, well, what do you think about these protests? He said the way black people have been over the years has to be one of the most like amazing things that they have not reacted more violently to where people have been violent to us. That was the context. But, ego prevails between these two. And so Adam Clayton Powell, who had made, a name for himself in Congress, and he was one of the few black people, Congressman Dawson from Chicago was there too, but he was not nearly as brazen, brave, the way Adam Clayton Powell was. So Adam Clayton Powell took a lot of hits, but he wanted to work with John F. Kennedy, and he, quote unquote, understood how politics worked. And quite frankly, Martin Luther King wasn't here for it. And so this kind of like keeping his head down in the meeting and just kind of rolling his eyes like, don't. When I say they had beef, it didn't go down like that. Okay, I know I had to go through all these details. All right, I had to go through Adam Clayton Powell's FBI files, okay, to write that thesis. All right, so, but ego prevails. And also, I think Powell knew of the charisma and effect Dr. King was having on America and certainly African Americans. And he knew his word would go a lot further. And quite frankly, was true. Neither party had done anything. And Martin Luther King was not to be trifled with. I also think the age difference and idea of who should be the gatekeeper, and this is just my perspective, generally speaking, the age difference between Powell and Martin Luther King and the idea of who should be the gatekeeper in the black struggle was and is also a problem, which is why the voice of women who were always there have been historically, whether in real life freedom struggles or in history books, suppressed and limited. Because even the people who write about it or have gotten opportunities and contracts from book publishers to write about have been black men who, no, actually overwhelmingly white men who have actually written about this history because they get the book contracts, but still suppress these stories of black women. Anyway, then we get Roy Wilkins. I don't know how many of y'all know about Roy Wilkins, okay? So consider this a review and a history lesson. So now Roy Wilkins was the executive secretary of the NAACP for many years, and he had worked with the NAACP for about 4 decades, okay? Now, I'm not going to talk about the unceremonious way the NAACP pushed him out in the 70s, but we'll leave that alone for now because we're supposed to be talking about Bayard Rustin and his life. Now, depending on who you ask, you'll get a lot of answers regarding Roy Wilkins. However, I will say what is considered a conservative now, what was considered a conservative then would be a radical now. We've regressed in many ways. Okay, so what black people would consider conservative and not brave in a Roy Wilkins back then, he would actually be considered radical in this context. In a day of sensitivity, in a day of, well, I'll just keep saying people of color and I'll do this. And, if you just keep your head down and work, like when I say black America was blowing up in the 60s, it was blowing up because of all of this anger, all of this oppression that had been suppressed for centuries. They could not express themselves. You know how much bravery that takes? Okay. And I'll get on Roy Wilkins some other time about his politics because, yes, I do have issues with him. But nevertheless, I feel like I have to say this because black people let too many people off the hook. Like y'all still sitting around listening to Kanye's dumbass. He can't get a stream from me. Not a one. Slavery was a choice was enough for me. Him going around saying wild, disrespectful stuff about Harriet Tubman and basically re-empowering white people to control the story. How dare you, sir? Black people are forgiven to everybody in the world except for black women. Black women are often forgiven to everybody in the world except for black women. Anyway, no, Chris Rock is a comedian, not a serious actor, and had no business playing the part of Roy Wilkins, a civil rights legend, and he did not have the chops for the part. And so you're looking at somebody who looks like they're trying to act. And that's what I'm talking about. When I say people who are not good actors in general keep getting purported to these parts, I find that disrespectful to my history. And everybody else's history doesn't get treated like that. That's why I have a problem with it. Okay? So I want Hollywood to leave things alone. That includes Barack and Michelle, who want to be on Netflix now because they're afraid they'll lose relevance. Yeah, I said it. Y'all were in Chicago when R. Kelly was running sex rings of girls, and y'all lived on the South Side. Don't act like there's no way y'all didn't hear about this stuff. And y'all were lawyers, no less. And y'all didn't say anything then. And when it came down to it, as Black Lives Matter was gaining traction, all y'all did was bring a few of them to the White House and then ignore them. And I am somebody who I think became very disappointed because I knew Barack Obama knew better. And anybody who's read Dreams of My Father and you read his life, Barack Obama knew better. Barack Obama got that memo. He understood race relations. So for me, him talking about his experiences growing up and how white people treated him and even his white family, and him having these run-ins with the police, realizing, oh no, I'm black. Like when I say he got the memo, he got the memo. He grew up in Hawaii, but he got the memo. And so when you see somebody know that, document that in a book prior to becoming president, that was a bestseller before he became president. I look at it and go, that's why it offends me. You're talking about somebody who for the first time ever said there was somebody I really wanted to be like in life, in Michelle Obama. Because I felt like not only was she smart, she was black, she was tall, she was from the South Side, she worked hard, she married a man who at least I saw as equally yoked with her, which we don't always see black women able to do. And I admired her so much. And as her voice became smaller, and this may have always been there, but I think I was so enamored with her. The kind of black middle class judgment I saw of her and the way she talked to black people. Both of the Obamas have a bad habit of talking down to black people. Okay, remove your house shoes and put on your marching shoes. That's what you say to the National Urban League, Obama. Michelle Obama talking about there's no excuses. And even when she came to give her speech in Spelman, that wasn't my graduation year. I had Susan Rice the year before. But I was just kind of like, you could tell what she thought of stereotypical black people. She wasn't really talking down to Spelman people. I could tell she didn't understand black culture. What she thought was black was disturbing to me. I wasn't impressed. It was very manufactured, and it just it fell flat for me. Anyway, so I say all of that to say, but now y'all want to have y'all's hands in black history stories and then not even tell them right. Okay, because let's be clear. These kind of things are marketed with their name. So yeah, I'm going to need you to do better. Moving on, Glenn Turman plays A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph. None of these aren't important people that didn't work together. This is why I think it bothers me so, on top of it. A. Philip Randolph was a socialist. He organized black men in the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters to give black male train workers a union because white people wouldn't let black people into their unions. Okay? And a lot of black men, if you ever need to see a film, 100 Black Men Named George, that was actually a good historical film. But anyway, get into your history if you want to learn more about these people. And Adam Clayton Powell threatened to expose Bayard Rustin as a gay man, not only in the movie, but in real life. And it was really, his exposure, Bayard Rustin, really wasn't about Rustin as much as it was to help push MLK off this political press toward justice. His resentment for Martin Luther King's leadership and charisma was real. And Bayard Rustin because of his closeness to Martin Luther King, became a threat as far as he was concerned. So the problem is, y'all had the wrong one. Okay, y'all think people, like I said, y'all think people didn't know Bayard Rustin was gay, but he had the attitude. Okay, they had the stuff about him. Adam Clayton Powell had that's what I'm talking about right now. Had the attitude that, well, half the stuff about me out there isn't true either. So what if I put out a rumor that him and Martin Luther King are gay together? I don't care. I know the power of killing, and that's really the discrimination, right? To know the power of, if you expose this part of somebody's life, like the gayness, it can destroy something, and that you couldn't see past your individual insecurities for the larger movement, which is something that Martin Luther King was able to do. So, but like I said, he just has the attitude. I don't think about the attitude that has stuff wasn't true about me either, and I'm going to use this. And, you made Bayard Rustin essentially part of your campaign against Martin Luther King that was personal. Yeah, so when y'all hear dumbasses say shit like, oh, Martin Luther King was gay, that's where that rumor comes from. That rumor is old. Okay, that's where it comes from. So the ridiculous dramatics, can I also say, in this movie, of the jazz noises, at the so-called gotcha moments, like when MLK didn't react immediately to Bayard Rustin's resignation, that Bayard Rustin didn't even run the game past him, like, and they were like, well, we thank you for your service. And I was just like, first of all, the historical problems with even that, the way that went down, was so problematic. But then when they did like the jazz noises, like something out of a cartoon, I was just so annoyed. So whoever did the soundtrack was one of those people who did the music that they like, instead of the kind of music that applies, that would resonate with the audience. And it certainly didn't resonate with me. And whoever did it should never do music again. So let's talk about the budget for this film. I do not like when characters or their sets and outfits look like caricatures of itself. Like, when I say to be a caricature of a caricature is a problem, it's a problem for me. Like the Afro and Spike Lee's old, tired, whack-ass Black Klansman movie. And like this movie, like you could literally see like the lace front of like hair that literally looked like carpet. Like, it was bad. And for everybody to look like a character instead of a historical figure, bothered me. So Black people, like, in film, going backwards, like the Obamas, the Oprahs of the world, need to keep their hands out of stuff they don't know about. Just leave it alone. Just leave it alone and put your name on it. Don't encourage it, so people don't continue to get this bad information. Because I already know some kid is going to come up to me, did you see that movie? Like, I can already imagine the crazy stuff that kids are thinking in their head, particularly the non-Black ones that think they understand now about the whole movement. Okay? Anyway, Bayard Rustin. And I say that because Black people sometimes have a tendency to tell their children, look, they don't depict our history right. Like, Black kids will approach these kind of movies with suspicion, if they're raised right. And I just feel like white kids aren't taught to do that because, once again, this has obviously been truncated, or non-Black children just in general. Anyway, so, and not all of them, but you know what I'm talking about. So, I mean, the hair, the wigs, even on the men look bad. Bayard Rustin jumping in to protect that white boy, okay, is a typical scene for Hollywood. Okay, like, he's fighting for Black freedom, but look, he still protects us. And my thing is, Rustin did have that kind of energy, and he was raised as a Quaker. He had a different kind of upbringing. But the whole idea that a good civil rights leader jumps in to protect the good white folk missed me, while ignoring all the radical things they did and do. Once again, because even the Black history movies have to placate the white psyche. And I don't like that. Okay? So the fact that this movie leads up to the March on Washington in 1963 is already a problem for me. Because it's treated as this climax point in Black history, and this old narrative of the politics of decline. See, when Black people were behaving, look at all the progress they were making. They're being invited to the White House after this. rah. And it was to those rowdy militant black people with the bad attitudes in the urban cities, and the Black Panther Party came and just tore it apart. White people were coming around. That's BS. Okay? They weren't. And this is not the climax of our movement. Not to mention, let's talk about how John F. Kennedy was threatening to pull the mics on live TV if it got too radical, if he didn't like something he said, and made John Lewis change his speech because it was too radical. Okay? And honestly, I watched John Lewis's March on Washington speech, which does not get played to you and stuff down your throat the same way. And I was like, you know what? I'm here for it. And I was like, what did the original look like? So, of course, I have, what's it called? It's not A Long Walk to Freedom. That's Nelson Mandela's. But I have, where's my John Lewis book? What's it called? Yeah, John Lewis, Walking with the Wind, his memoir. And you read parts that you like, oh, shoot. You know what I mean? Like, but, my thing is, show that. You know what I mean? Show what it was. So they act like this is the peak of the civil rights movement because it becomes more and more racially polarized as time goes on. The same way the abolitionist movement became more polarized because white people feel like at their core, they're still doing you a favor, which is the superiority of them believing that you're less than they are. And that's the issue. And that's what I've seen from the blatant racism that I grew up with in Georgia to go into someplace like California and New York, where these white people feel like this righteous sort of, you should be grateful in word that I'm even acknowledging your presence, and to be completely dismissive. So anyway, but it becomes racially polarized because white people start thinking they can tell black people how to get free. And many of those young black people, like in SNCC and stuff like that, who just became a black girl with the attitude toward Bayard Rustin in like a 30-second scene, were really because those black people were going directly to those white people and saying, look, we don't need you coming into our neighborhoods telling us and training us on how to deal with white people. We've been doing this our whole lives. Our ancestors have been teaching us how to deal with white people. What we need you to do is go into white neighborhoods and talk to them about their racism. And that kind of stuff, they didn't like that because they felt comfortable teaching and instructing black people because they felt superior. All right? So anyway, so just the fact that it's going up to the March on Washington. Now, I will say for Bayard Rustin's life, though, in terms of this being a movement that he engineered and was the architect of, yes, it's okay for it to kind of culminate for this film. I just don't think you should have called it Rustin. You should have just found another way to say March or something. Because the fact that he's born in like 1912 and lives till 1987 to make that the culminating point of his life, where he continued to fight not only for political rights, but for gay rights, the rights of the poor, all the way till his death in 1987. Well over 20 years after that march even happened, is some bullshit to his legacy. It is. It just is. And can we address the fact that this looked like a high school play? Okay, who casted these people? Okay, especially people like Medgar Evers. Speaking of which, now let me tell you something. All the colorism police, all of them, the colorism police, okay, that have a fit when a light-skinned person plays somebody who was the darker complexion, or, them people, colorism police. Y'all should have been mad about the person who played John Lewis, okay? Colorism police, where y'all at on this? Okay, there was nothing distinctive about that guy's acting. Why do y'all have him looking nothing like John Lewis? Nothing like, and Hollywood has this idea of what blackness looks like. So everybody in the movie had to be like, browner than usual. Like Dr. Anna Hedgeman, light, bright, almost white. But see, that seems to be okay with the rest of y'all. And we just need to call all of this out. And see, a lot of people don't like to do it because it's such a sensitive topic in our community, and nobody wants to appear like the lighter complexion person who may seem to be saying something discriminatory, because there are a lot of feelings here, right? But I'm not here for it. The guy who played Medgar Evers looked nothing like Medgar Evers, didn't sound like Medgar Evers, and whose life was brought to a screeching halt in the driveway of his Mississippi home while his kids stayed up and waited for him, and he's murdered, shot in his back for fighting for black people's rights in Mississippi. Yeah, what I think y'all could do is at least cast him correctly. Anyway, I say this to say because Tina Turner played Angela Bassett. Do they look alike? No. Malcolm X, light skin. Another one, red hair. His nickname was Red for a reason. Okay, played by Denzel Washington. Iconic, right? Exactly. That's the point. Okay, they didn't look like those people because the point is whoever is the best actor, the best black actor, should play that part. Period. And that's where our issue should be. Okay? So, colorism police, because I know y'all out there, do your due diligence and come forward all, not some of it. Like, old girl, Zoe Saldana should not have been playing Nina Simone. One, because she didn't like to even be considered black, and Nina Simone embodied blackness. You walking around with blackface on? That, yes. Now, see, that's what you deserve to do. Now, Cicely Tyson did walk around with light powdered makeup on when she played Coretta Scott King, which I thought was completely unnecessary. But nevertheless, that was in 78, so we're going to leave it alone because, you know, cameras, colors, you know, whatever. But what I am saying is that once again, this is one of those things where it's the African-American context. Everybody's considered black in this country. A little bit black makes you black. And so when we only defended to shame light-skinned people for not looking a certain way when they're black or the way they act, and then we talk about our preference for darker men and darker skinned men, particularly black women. And then when black men say, hey, I prefer light-skinned women, it's, you know, it's colorism, and all of a sudden, and I'm not saying that it's not driven by that with a lot of black men, but I am saying that if we're going to talk about, we need to talk about all of it. We need to talk about me as a light-skinned girl being isolated by other black girls who just presumed I thought I was better from the time I was a kid. And this is why being in church was helpful. But at school, and you think you're white because you're smart, this and the other, that didn't make me hate myself, but that's because I had parents who grounded me in loving who I was as a black person and understanding I wasn't any less black than anybody else. And that was their ignorance, but it was very hurtful for me. And I know people get teased because they're being dark, because they were dark, and I watched that happen to other people as well. And then some of those very people were my closest friends, and then other people couldn't understand it. No, we really became friends, one, because we had a lot in common. Also, when you're teased, finding comfort in that and knowing what that feels like. And also, darker skinned kids who had grown up in families where they had already prepared them to deal with that kind of colorism, but to still love who they were as black people. And so that's why I think I get, like we all do, we all have personal connections to this. And I'm sitting up here like, no, because I didn't turn into a Candace Owens to prove that. Because white people were always racist to me. You know what I mean? Like, I still had to, function in those environments. My education was central. My blackness was central. My faith was central. So when I hear those things, it seems to come out of a place of ignorance and also a place of not wanting to appear, colorist. So I'll just say all these things that we're really not even dealing with our history and the complexities of it. You know what I mean? Like, miss me. So anyway, so colorism police, y'all need to get on it. I mean, if y'all gonna do it, y'all need to call people out about John Lewis anyway. But he wasn't in the movie long enough. Did I say Chris Rock and these hairline wigs have no business in this movie? If I did, I don't care because I want to reinforce that. And he was doing that part of grave injustice. So we get the push for the March on Washington, which a lot of people thought would never happen, but a lot of other people were crazy enough to believe that it could. And a lot of people don't realize a lot of times, and this is what I'm saying about the history of it. And I just wish somebody would be committed to the art. Somebody with the money, call me. I'm just no, do call me if you need some, historical advice. But the thing is, this is in the context of the Cold War. All this international media, Jet Magazine publishing Emmett Till's face, right? That goes across, like I said, the world. So these recently decolonized nations in Asia, becoming decolonized nations in Africa, are seeing all of this. So the March on Washington is not only to demand rights, it's also to show how black people have demonstrated, along with white allies who come there to demonstrate peacefully. And look how they treat us. Okay? That kind of stuff. That needs to be understood. The level of resistance it takes to not fight somebody who smacks you, hits you, calls you to end. Like, you have to be taught as a black person not to react to that. Still, for the preservation of your own life. But it's not because that need to do it was never there. That's human. So the NAACP did a lot, and they did stand in the way of a lot as well, okay? And people began to break off from it for that reason when they started demanding more rights, including Martin Luther King Jr. himself, Bayard Rustin, Ella Baker, people who understood that organizing was very important, but they couldn't do it with people trying to limit, how far, what black liberation looked like. So Elias Taylor, we get him. He's a fictional character, by the way. Okay, he is not a historical player. Let's be clear. I want to make sure that's clear because this bothered me too. He's not a real person who they decided to create. I see as a creation to sensationalize Bayard Rustin's sexuality. Okay, so to tell the story of him and MLK's interactions as a rumor. Okay, see, that was factual. But then to act as if Rustin was in on supporting down low preachers and down low men who were clearly in relationships with women, and he took on this kind of role with this fictional character to act like, no, it wasn't Martin Luther King, but he was with another preacher. And that's not true. It's not. And it's not right to Bayard Rustin and the level of integrity that he had. No, he did one of the bravest things that any human being could do, and that was to be black and gay and open, just like Langston Hughes, just like James Baldwin. And that was no easy space to occupy. So you have to really gird your loins and stand up for what you believe in order to do that. That is not easy. And I just think when you do that and you sensationalize like that, you trivialize what people really had to do. Why isn't the real story entertaining? Why isn't the real story of any conflict that Bayard Rustin worked through in and of himself? Why can't that be entertaining? Who wouldn't be entertained by that? I know people who benefit from having these distorted narratives. So it's not the fact that they're talking about him being gay. I want to be clear about that. But y'all are creating a fake story. That's what I don't like. So the down low preachers that exist now, and some existed then too, but you create this character, like I said, that essentially takes Martin Luther King's preacher's character, mixes it with the idea. It annoys me. And fighting for black rights in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, in addition to like people like Bayard Rustin, but Pauli Murray, who I don't know how she would categorize herself now, but certainly in many ways was trans, like a trans man, and just did incredible work and became the first, ordained priest, black woman ordained priest in the Episcopalian Church. I mean, like things like that, who had been organizing sit-ins in the 40s when she was a student at Howard. Like, why isn't that truth? You know what I mean? Why isn't that entertaining? But y'all should watch the documentary Pauli. I think it's on Amazon. It came out a few years ago. So I just hate the way black history is distorted. And then they get some big time upper middle class black people, because technically there's no upper class in the United States. Right, I know. To sign off on it, and that somehow makes it true, i.e. Michelle and Barack. And that's why I was going in on them at first. But that's okay. But when they have a white man play Barack Obama in 20 years from now, I'm not going to say nothing. You know what? Because he probably wanted it that way. He likes distorting history. He want to make sure you know that he is all these. You know what? Obama's another story. So they show how the children marched in Birmingham, Alabama with Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King was actually very hesitant to let these teenagers do this. They came and asked him at one of the prayer meetings because they were fighting, his rights to vote, this, that, and the other, this, that, and the other. And those kids wanted to be a part of it. And, some of their parents were for it, some of their parents were against it. Some of them, they said go to school anyway. But Martin Luther King finally, and through prayer and these things, finally said, you know what, if we've got to do this, they are fighting for what they've seen us set the example for. And we know it's dangerous, and I know we're trying to protect them. But maybe we need to let them march. So the ones whose parents let them march, some of them snuck into the march, whatever. So that scene, now this is where I really think, see this, if they would have done this, I would have appreciated the movie more, right? So that scene with Bayard Rustin going off on those Quaker white organizers, when that white man said, shame on Dr. King. And he was like a sheriff, and police officers are spraying children with water hoses and sicking German shepherds on a bunch of teenagers who are fighting peacefully for their rights. And the first words out your mouth was shame on Dr. King. And that is key. That scene, to me, like if they would have done the movie with that kind of intensity, that was key to understanding what Bayard Rustin had to reconcile with, having grown up in this sort of Quaker environment, and quite frankly, how white people truly see black people. That the key to understanding how white people think and how they think about black people should know better. They knew what Bull Connor would do. They knew the police would react like that instead of blame racism and blaming the racist acts being placed and forced upon black people. Okay, which Martin Luther King talked about in his 1963 book, Why We Can't Wait. 63 or 64? It was 63. Y'all are going to stop playing around with this truncated version of black history. But the point is, the anger that we saw in Bayard Rustin's scene was like, how dare you do that? You bypass all the racism you just saw and say, well, black people should know better, essentially. Right? And Ella Baker talking to Bayard Rustin about his relationship with Martin Luther King Jr. and establishing, rebuilding their friendship after the whole NAACP issue. She helped build the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, okay, that Martin Luther King ultimately became the head of. And King and other preachers basically pushed her out as a black woman leader, and she talks about that. And she said, but she knew it couldn't last long, even though she felt like the organization was important, because she said that's not just how the Black Baptist churches are set up. To have a woman that's in a position of power and who's not quiet. So the chances of such a conversation in that context, when her and Martin Luther King thought the same way on a lot of things, which is why they could work together, but the idea of her role as a black woman, which is why she helped form SNCC and invested, like James Baldwin gave the same advice to Nikki Giovanni, invest in things you can change. The kids, the young people. She went and helped organize young college students to really be more active in fighting for their rights and a more radical edge, because many of those members of SNCC break off into the Black Panther Party. Anyway, I'm just saying the chances of that conversation and the way they depicted it, like, why does it have to be so wrong? Then they have Coretta Scott King looking like she's 70 years old and somebody's grandma. And yes, she was a singer. She was a trained vocalist and everything. Like, but see, y'all just take pieces of history and throw it together. Like, with no context. And like I tell my students, when you take the text out of context, you end up with a con. And that's why it's important. Context, okay? Can't stress that enough. So Martin Luther King comes back to his own house. Bayard Rustin is there, hanging out with the kids. They playing and singing and doing whatever. And then Martin Luther King looks like he's playing a younger version of himself when he comes in with that Applejack hat, looking like he's still a student at Morehouse. If y'all don't cut it out. Y'all remember that sister episode where Tamara didn't want to do her work, and she goes to that Black History memory, and she runs into Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King says, look, I don't want to go to college. She was like, no, boy, you got to go to college. And he had the Applejack hat on. That's what it reminded me of. If y'all watch Black College, you know. So anyway, then they gave light-skinned John Lewis, okay? And I wouldn't have known it was John Lewis if they had not titled him. And I'm just going to say this movie, in general, looked like a high school play. And I'm not talking about like from a Tennessee Williams script or like an August Wilson kind of play with high schoolers doing the acting. Like it looked like one of those high schoolers group projects you may give at the end of the year. And they take what they took notes on, what they had readings on, and try to create like a good project where they're reenacting these historical moments. And not only is it painful to watch because it's bad, but it's also painful to grade and not completely discourage their whole, life and existence. Anyway, so the whole push for money for the March on Washington, having black women go and tell their stories about how they were told their dreams wouldn't come true in Mississippi and Alabama in Sunday school. Stop. Okay, another problem. First of all, we all know that the black church is where people encourage you, especially in the South, during this time and even after. Like I said, church was central to my life, and that really, it saved me. God himself and the structure of the encouragement of the church. But to think these black women could just go into the Upper East Side, okay, of New York and tell some so-called white liberals on the Upper East Side their story, and they would just hand them some money because they felt sorry for them. No, that's what some white people do now. Okay? Some of them. All right, and we see after 2020 how quick they took that corporate money back. Anyway, they didn't even want their maids hardly in their house, okay? So let alone, hell, they're nannies now. I know, I worked at a private school on the Upper East Side, okay? Trust. This whole idea they were liberal and just handing black people money, they don't even want to pay them people that work for them, living in all that luxury that came off our backs. Okay, and it was just pissing me off. The whole idea, oh yeah, now we're collecting all this money. They felt sorry for us. We gave that little story. Like, that is not how that works. That was not how it worked. Catch, okay? So I don't like the way they tried to make Dr. Martin Luther King look weak. I know I've said that a million times, but it just bothers me. He was no minor player in this. This movie was garbage, okay? The whole idea also that Bayard Rustin was just simply going around robbing the cradle, I didn't really like that implication either. He was with a white male partner for over 20 years who was younger than him. But like I just didn't like that implication. I didn't. It bothered me. And I felt like it leaned too much into the stereotype that gay people are not only perverts, but child molesters. And I didn't like that. I know that's not what they said, but I felt like that was kind of loosely implied to a point where it was dangerous. I'm keeping it real. All right. So, like I said, then we get to the final scenes of the March on Washington. The lack of context. They set up this damn 2-hour movie to get to this part of history. And the trouble it was to organize it without explaining the fucking goal of organizing this march. It was not a damn homecoming parade. It wasn't a tailgate. It was a protest. The March on Washington for, wait for it, fill in the blank, jobs and freedom. Because the right to an income, the right to a life, the right to be able to take care of oneself is a form of freedom. And not to mention the actual physical freedom of being able to be black without constantly being harassed everywhere you go. How do you manage to leave that part out? Exactly. And they're demanding that of the federal government. That's why they were so involved and angry about it. So then, of course, we can't end this movie without playing the last 30 seconds of the I Have a Dream speech, okay? Because they insist on forcing that one down our throats, okay? Because Hollywood wants us to remember our struggle for liberation with no context and a bunch of weak black people. Do you know how hard it is to implement nonviolence in the face of brutal repression? And I hate that they act like we are just like these sullied people who just don't have anything else. I would say back to the drawing board, but instead I just want to say stop making historical movies while failing to do any history research. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. It was like how they ruined Kendrick. Just don't do it. All right? If y'all want to learn about Bayard Rustin and you don't want to read, go watch the documentary Brother Outsider from like 2003. If you are unwilling to read about him, but learn something that is powerful enough. It was like a Sundance like winner or whatever. But yeah, I wasn't here for it. And these are my ideas. This is what I do. History. And I'll talk to y'all soon. See y'all later. Bye.